Episode 3, A Tale of Two Cases. Emil Blonsky's parole hearing, and then DA Dennis Bukowski seeking damages against an Asgardian shapeshifter who defrauded him into thinking he was dating, and supporting apparently, Megan Thee Stallion. I think that was the biggest argument that could be made for why he shouldn't have believed that was Megan Thee Stallion, because she was making him pay for everything. I don't know. They could have said he was very chivalrous. But anyway, we'll talk about that case in detail because I think the Pug handled it wrong. I think the show handled it wrong. But anyway, yes, that was the biggest Easter egg this episode. Megan Thee Stallion herself. And I think it's very telling that that's the biggest Easter egg of a Marvel episode. I think it just shows how much this show is trying to expand its appeal in the MCU audience. For people who would be like, what? Megan Thee Stallion? I'll best watch that episode. And probably be a little disappointed because she's not in it that much. You know, they had a real opportunity with whatever that gag was, like on that, I guess, YouTube video, right, that they showed the Shapeshifter was doing. And I guess they could, just like they're having trouble coming up, I think, with good legal arguments, they couldn't come up with a good prank. But aren't a lot of these writers from Rick and Morty? How do you not come up with a good prank? Unless it's a prank, you know, that they couldn't get Marvel or Megan Thee Stallion to sign off on. Although Megan Thee Stallion, I think, is pretty game because she did a really nice job here. So basically, she shows up not just in court to see what the fuss is all about, what's going on here, who's imitating me, but in the end credits retains Jen Walters as her new attorney, complete with celebratory dance. Now, I thought Megan Thee Stallion was going to get Jen to give that shapeshifter a cease and desist. And maybe she will. But apparently, as I said, she's her overall new attorney, representing her in all matters. Now, isn't Jen specializing in superhuman law? But I guess, you know, you could either argue that Megan Thee Stallion is a superhuman celebrity. She's such a star, she's a superhuman. Or GLK&H, and this is the more reasonable explanation, is that GLK&H would love to have a celebrity client, so they'll allow Jen to expand her roster of clients. You know, it's certainly if it would include, you know, people like Megan Thee Stallion. I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but hey, She-Hulk twerked, and I can't tell if that's fun or desperate. I suspect somewhere in between. What did you think of that? What did you think of that? I don't know, like a part of me was like, oh, that's funny. They seem to be having a good time. And the other part of me was like, is twerking, I mean, I don't know. I think like twerking had its moment, but now it just seems like it's trying too hard to be like cool and current. I don't know. Let's see. Let's see. All right, to me, the most interesting moment by far this episode was the very last scene. And this worked on so many levels. It had Marvel Easter eggs. It was a great commentary on women and She-Hulk. Oh my God. All right, so she's coming home after work, and Jen is attacked in a dark alley like so many women are. But she realizes that she's She-Hulk now and doesn't have to be the victim. Now it's the Wrecking Crew that attacks her. Thunderball is in fact one of the names of those members. That you know, one of them is referenced as Thunderball. Now in the comics, long story short, they were small-time criminals who got accidental Asgardian or enchanted enhancements after an accidental run-in with none other than Loki himself. So it's kind of close, right? She-Hulk jokes that they look like they ripped off an Asgardian construction worker, which they confirmed to actually be what happened. And, you know, that looks like an Asgardian construction helmet. That must have been the best construction worker ever, right? Because, I mean, it looks like he's a one-man building team or wrecking crew. Now 4 people. But I guess it's, you know, it's a less complicated origin story. I don't know. I mean, they have the Asgardian elements there. I would have really liked it to have been like something to do with Loki, maybe. I mean, I guess Loki's too big to have that kind of an interaction. But still, I don't know. I mean, whatever. Now, they act ridiculous. They act totally ridiculous. But they're a very serious threat, which is so often the case. The stupidest stuff is actually often the most dangerous. I mean, we've seen that a lot in the news. So anyway, they're trying to get Jen Walters' blood. I told you, episode 1 set up that Banner blood is very valuable. And it also set up that a Banner has to be in human form to get that blood. Now, the Wrecking Crew, when they get back in the van, references a mysterious boss. So they, or someone else, will surely be trying to get that blood again. Also, I don't know if it was cut from this sequence. It would seem to be in a different room, but in one of the trailers, we saw a whole suitcase of needles. You know, some broken, some fresh and ready to go. We'll see. So we'll see if they can get their hands on Jen's blood, which Bruce Banner said is even more valuable than his. But what really sold this scene, in my opinion, was Jen at the end, left alone in the alley, her clothes and shoes destroyed, in tatters, cleaning up all of her papers off the ground. Like her whole human self just sprawled on the ground in the dirt. And then she stood up and catched a glimpse of herself in the car window. I mean, wow. This was a moment where she should have felt on top of the world, Ma. Strength. She just won the fight. She wasn't a victim. Or was she? She looks at herself there and she seems so vulnerable and sad because I think she's thinking, is she a monster? Is this a curse? What has her life become? It's getting to her, man. It's getting to her. All the things that you saw building up over the whole episode. It's just, I think in that a moment where she's alone, she just allows herself to be vulnerable. And you can't see it that well because they can't afford to light the She-Hulk scenes very well. You'll notice that every time She-Hulk shows up, for the most part, it's either very brief or very dark, or sometimes both. Now then, after they have her looking in the reflection, we cut to a sketch of the innocent, lively human Jen she once was, with a bright future ahead of her, a future that she's still going to fight for. And then I believe it's a new song, a new Thee Stallion song comes on, and the whole sequence is just absolutely perfect. I mean, powerful stuff. I mean, that hit me in the feels. I was like, I feel you, Jen. I feel you. I don't know how sympathetic everyone else is going to be to you, but I care. And I felt really bad for her. And that was great. I mean, she's grappling with so much stuff. Superhero is a stand-in for celebrity. I mean, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's hidden in a very fluffy episode that seems like it's innocuous and has no meaning. All right, let's keep going. All right, so of course, Wong. We love Wong. And this isn't even the really good Wong episode. That's next week. That's a great Wong episode. I can't wait. Now, yes, at the beginning, Jen acknowledges at the top of the show, breaking the fourth wall, even taking her hands off the steering wheel, because, that's not real, very funny, that this is kind of a cameo show. I mean, don't forget whose show it is at the end of the day. But yes, it does rely on fun guest stars week to week. And speaking of fun, we get to see Wong's LinkedIn equivalent page, which is absolutely hilarious. I saw this leak on social media, less than 12 hours before the episode. And I was like, it's one of the few funny things here. Why would you leak it? All right, so he's just Wong, like Cher or Beyonce, last name, just Wong. So his current job is Sorcerer Supreme. Before that, he was the librarian at Comertage. And then before that, a Target sales associate in Comertage. So real, so relatable. I loved it. I thought that was so clever. And I explains to some degree his patience, yet also frustration with dealing with the most difficult customer there is, Dr. Stephen Strange. I thought that was great. And then one mutual connection you can see with Bruce Banner. Superheroes on a LinkedIn type site. Can you imagine the requests? Because clearly there are normal people on there, unless her paralegal was using her superhuman account. But I thought that was interesting. But the connection that matters for this episode is Wong's connection with Emil Blonsky, because thanks to the leaked footage from last week, everyone knows they were involved together in an underground cage match. Now, Wong and Emil Blonsky claim that Wong recruited Emil against his will to help him sharpen his fighting skills as the new Sorcerer Supreme. But we were backstage at that fight, thank you very much, in Shang-Chi. We know that was a fixed fight and an underground fight that was for money. So, come on. So it would seem that Wong is just as irresponsible a Sorcerer Supreme as Stephen Strange. He even jokingly referenced erasing everyone's memory and how that's a bad idea and it's messy. I thought that was great. I thought that was really funny. But amazingly, the parole board buys all of this. It's so flimsy. It's ridiculously flimsy. I can see through it. It's so flimsy. And I guess they felt that it was kind of convincing that Wong and Blonsky pointed out that he did return to his cell despite Wong offering him asylum in Comertage. I'd be like, so? Why would he mind returning to his cell when it's clear he can leave it at any time he wants with you? They're even okay with Blonsky's 7 pen pals, aka soulmates. I don't know. I told you it's not Thunderbolts. It's these women who have not only purchased him a plot of land, but have all agreed to financially support him. If it sounds like a cult and looks like a cult, and boy does it look like a cult, it's probably a cult. I guess at the end of the day, the parole board agrees to all this because of Jen's suggestion that Emil wear an inhibitor. So forget about, his argument that he just chooses not to become the Abomination. This way he can't, unless he plays around with it. I don't trust Emil for a second. He's even, Tim Roth is even playing him as like the sleaziest guy. So it's great. It's so funny. I can't wait. I hope he has. If he doesn't have something up his sleeve, I'm going to be disappointed. Now, you'll remember that Wanda was wearing an inhibitor collar at the end of Civil War, and the TVA also put one on Loki. This is a real game changer for humans versus supes. I don't know what General Ross, Secretary Ross, was getting so upset about. If he had these babies, he'd be like, everybody close your eyes. I have a surprise for you. Boy, do I. Snap all these collars on. We've barely scratched the surface of what this means for the MCU. Inhibitor collars, of course, have been used aplenty in X-Men stories, from the comics to the animated series to the movies, to the point where I think as soon as a comic book fan sees one, they go, X-Men inhibitor collar. And one has to wonder, they barely use inhibitor collars in the non-X-Men comics in Marvel, so it's interesting to see them cross over, which makes me think that maybe once the X-Men do show up, if we've already got inhibitor collars being used on superhumans, maybe Sentinels will hunt all superpowered beings. That would be a fascinating wrinkle. I'd feel a little bad they weren't just special to the X-Men anymore, but it doesn't really work. Why would Sentinels only hunt X-Men? That makes no sense. All right, so I like that. I think that's interesting. I like it. So Emil Blonsky is free. And did he ditch those soulmates? Because in the end credits, one of the illustrations seems to be him leaving them behind. But he can't. They're paying for everything. But anyway, as we've seen in the trailers, we will be visiting his meditation retreat in a later episode at some point. Now, underscoring this show's complicated view of men is the fact that Jen gets not one but two very important ideas from guys during this episode. The inhibitor collar, that suggestion comes from Dennis Bukowski, who wishes there was a way to keep this shapeshifter from scamming others the way she scammed him. And also, Emil gives her some advice and advises her that if the press is going to write a story about her anyway, she might as well have a say in it. Now, I thought this was excellent. I thought this episode, did an excellent job capturing the current cultural zeitgeist and more specifically, the news cycle and how it works. From rumors spreading from site to site when they were outside the prison, and someone asked her and said, is it true you were rejected by the Avengers? And then without missing a beat, another journalist says, a new rumor says She-Hulk was rejected by the Avengers. I was like, that's hilarious. By the way, the rumor about She-Hulk getting her powers from a mafia hit gone wrong, that's a reference to how she got them actually in the comics. I thought that was cute. Then there's the reaction on the internet. Woo, somebody really looked at the internet, whoever made these comments up. I didn't even think it went as far as it could have. I was like, how do you not throw in the MCU complaint? I guess they were like, Grace, we're not ready for that. It hits a little too close to home still. But I thought that was interesting. They really showed a lot of the misogyny. And if anyone thinks that goes too far, Google She-Hulk. See what happens. All right, the tabloid clickbait of She-Hulk having the Abomination's baby, I thought that was great. And I thought the headline, attorney-client privilege, was awfully clever. I was like, I can't even get mad. That's a great headline. And also, I thought they did a good job of showing not just like the funny stuff, but the truly hurtful, angry things, like someone telling her she was a monster defending a monster. And then when Thunderball described She-Hulk as having nasty green skin. I mean, there's so much anger and hate and hurt in the real world. Why wouldn't that be applied to superheroes in a world where they existed? I mean, I thought that was great. Again, it hit me in the feels, man. It hit me in the feels. Loved it. And then once She-Hulk agrees to do an interview, they blindside her with questions about her diet and exercise secrets. Now, that I think is a commentary on the fact that actresses, specifically Scarlett Johansson in the MCU, has had only those questions asked of her during press junkets and none of her male co-stars. Although I do think that's changing, with some male stars even embracing it. Chris Hemsworth, for instance, has a whole diet and exercise business that's doing quite well. In fact, when you often Google these male stars for comic book movies, one of the first things that comes up is their exercise routines. People want to know. People want to know. The objectification of superheroes, I think, is certainly a parallel or a metaphor to the objectification of celebrities. And again, no one's really going to cry a river for any of these people, but I do think it's interesting. Objectification that becomes even more with increased access thanks to technology. You would think that getting to know celebrities or superheroes would make them, more human and people would feel more guilty about being meaner, but instead they just seem to have more material. But also, I think even beyond the way celebrities and superheroes are treated, there's on the flip side how these celebrities and superheroes are bending the rules, that the rules don't apply to them. I mean, look at Wong. He certainly doesn't seem to think any of the rules apply to him, and even others don't. When the parole board pointed out that he had broken the law by freeing Emil Blonsky from his prison, Wong was like, oh, that's my cue to go, and they let him go. They were like, oh, Wong, you scamp. Fascinating, fascinating. Again, a more sophisticated show would perhaps do more with this. But I'll take what we get, because it's still, at least even as a shred of an idea, very interesting. It's also very nice of Jen's friend and paralegal to try and handle all this attention, but really, GLK&H, a huge law firm, must have at least a PR person, but I would suspect an entire PR department, especially since they said taking on Emil Blonsky's case and having a superhero or a superhuman division in the first place was mostly about PR. Isn't someone handling all this PR? I mean, Jen, maybe she wouldn't want to have her narrative tied to the firm, but then she'd have to pay for her own PR executive, and that's extremely expensive. So I think at least to start out, until she starts getting brand deals, she would want the firm to handle her publicity for her. I would not go through her paralegal. Again, I mean, I guess the people who write the show also don't understand, but they're in the Hollywood business. How do they not understand how publicists and stuff work? I mean, she should be asking the law firm to pay for her wardrobe, quite frankly, because her photo's going to be taken in it. All right, so let's talk about GLK&H's Superhuman Law Division. There's not just the likable Pug, love Josh Segura, but also that's nothing like the character in the comics, by the way. Like every comic book reader, I loved Pug when we first met him. He had a really funny, interesting reason for wanting to be at GLK&H and represent superheroes. I don't want to ruin it in case they use it, and come to think of it, maybe they'll use Daredevil instead of Spider-Man to tell that story. I bet that's what they do. I'll be curious to see if that's what they do. That would be fascinating. Oh boy. But at the end of the day, Pug was in love with Jen, and he got friend-zoned, and he never got out of the friend zone. Oh, it was brutal to watch. And in fact, it was one of the things that made the comic go downhill in terms of quality, because you were like, what are you doing to Pug? So I hope that they don't. I hope they have like the superhero thing with Daredevil instead of Spider-Man, but I hope they don't friend-zone him. Also, Renee Elise Goldsberry is Mallory Book. That character in the comics is a legal rival of Jen's, and sometimes friend. They have like, a friendly, healthy competition, right? And it's surprising that she's just popped her head in here, considering what a big character she was in the comic. So I guess we'll see if there's a reason for her to be here in the show, besides just being a nod to that comic book character. As for Pug defending Dennis Bukowski, as I said, I did not care for the way they handled this case at all. And I think that it really shows that, yes, the She-Hulk writers' room does not know how to write court cases. First off, Bukowski wouldn't just sue to get the $175,000 back that he spent on the fake Thee Stallion. He would also sue for damages, which they did mention, but were not rewarded. But even beyond damages, he certainly would have to sue for his legal fees. I don't understand why that wasn't mentioned. Unless the entire division is pro bono for publicity, I would think legal fees would have been included in that penalty. The Shapeshifters defense, on the other hand, though, I thought was pretty solid. Although, no matter where you are, if you do have diplomatic immunity, you do have diplomatic immunity. I mean, it's quite controversial, in fact. Really strong, like I think even murders people have tried to get away with having diplomatic immunity in those situations. So it's a pretty good shield, legal shield, so to speak. I think she didn't have diplomatic immunity, which is why it was so easily dismissed. But then I thought the backup defense, if this was role play, and that Bukowski knew that she wasn't actually Thee Stallion, but it was convincing, so let's go with it, right? I thought that was an excellent defense. It would be very hard to prove that he didn't realize that. But then Pug's defense as to why Bukowski believed that was the real Thee Stallion, I thought it didn't work, and I thought it was unnecessarily insulting. First, how is Jen a valid witness? I don't care that she worked with Bukowski. She's a lawyer at the same firm that's now representing him. So of course she would have a story that would support their case. And also, wouldn't a callous jerk be more likely to agree to the role-playing and then change their mind and then claim that they were had? I mean, I think it would help the other side if that's what he was like. I think he'd be trying to hide that aspect of his personality. So I felt they just wrote it in so that Jen could humiliate and publicly insult Bukowski, and the show could publicly insult that type of guy. But I don't think they needed to go that route. I think what they should have done was the Cinderella defense, all right? So lots of celebrities, first of all, fall in love with regular people all the time. In fact, they often prefer them because, it's an escape from the craziness of their lives. Many celebrities are married to people who are not celebrities. Then how can anyone blame Bukowski for wanting the fairy tale? An actual line from Pretty Woman, a movie that was a huge hit where millions of people believed a story about a high-powered, very high-profile public businessman who married a prostitute. So if you believe that, and also nobody laughs at the idea of the prince and Cinderella falling in love with and marrying a maid, the scullery maid. Why is it so laughable when it's the man who gets to live the fairy tale? Why is it believable when this happens to a woman and not with a man? That's what I would have argued. And also, at the end of the day, she's a shapeshifter, a very convincing one. I don't understand why everybody was like, how could you have believed that? I'm like, she looks exactly like Megan Thee Stallion. Judge, she just looked exactly like you. What do you mean? So that just seemed crazy to me. I also didn't understand on that note why why the shapeshifter, after she impersonated a judge, Pug at the office, Dennis Bukowski himself, Megan Thee Stallion, right? So Megan Thee Stallion at least should have had a cease and desist. But after her wanton shapeshifting with no regard for the law, why wasn't she at least deported, even if she had diplomatic immunity, or given an inhibitor collar to keep her from pulling the same scam again and again? Why did Bukowski just have to wonder that? Why wouldn't that have come up to someone else? I would think the judge would be like, how are we going to keep this from happening, right? Or for her retaliating against my decision. Who's to say she wouldn't go, I think that's the shapeshifter might have, again, ridiculous behavior, actually very serious threat. And why wasn't someone from the Asgardian embassy, like some kind of emissary, at least there to collect her? It didn't make any sense to me. All right, overall, I thought this episode had very interesting bits and pieces, but was just too light and fluffy. And again, keeping with that theme, it might just seem ridiculous on the surface, but in fact, it's dangerously sloppily written. And I think chips away at the image of the MCU content. And I think the writing staff really has huge gaps in what they can write. And then they try and write it anyway. I'm surprised someone's not like, I think they need more MCU Easter eggs and characters and teases to really distract from their mistakes, which I think they had in the first 2 episodes. And since there aren't enough here, I think this stuff becomes really evident. But as I said, next week is my favorite of the 4 episodes. Oh, it's going to be great. I can't wait for us to go over it. But this episode had certainly, as I said, very interesting things. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts about them down below. So share those thoughts down below, subscribe today. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.